What's up, War Room? Welcome back. Joe Caparoso, Connor Rogers. It's time. It's an annual tradition here. We're not going to answer Discord questions today. We're going to do that in the podcast. It is the Almost Jets episode. CR, are you ready to dive in to one of our favorite things to do here on War Room? And this is the only place to do it. It is War Room. How we feeling?
Good. It's a tradition like no other. I'm always astounded at the names that I forget that have popped up as Almost Jets or in the Almost Jets Hall of Fame for us. I feel like anybody that, if you're subscribing by now to War Room, you have a pretty good feel for this is a classic Joe and Connor talking point for how many years now. And the best part is it just grows every single year.
Yeah, I think what prompted this is that, sure enough, there was like some leak or chatter that the Jets were interested in Calvin Ridley last year, and they didn't get it done. And it was a clip resurfaced from our friend Boy Green about how you were talking a year or so ago or 2 years ago about how you prefer Garrett Wilson to Calvin Ridley, which has worked out. And now maybe the Jets get both. We, of course, also know there was the recent, they almost got, was it Fletcher Cox? And then Odell did an interview about how close he was to being a Jet. This is always a thing that players are talking about, how they were almost a Jet. And it's not even Douglas specific. I think we started this shtick in the McCagnon era when there was a lot of times the Jets were like close to getting someone or interested. And then they would leak out that they were in it, but they didn't get it. And they have built such an impressive team of people who were almost here. And you could also include a couple of people who were almost landed on draft day that everyone thought they were getting and it didn't work out. So we'll keep it pretty loose and flowing and talk about some of our memories as we tick through some of these different positions. I got a great tweet that kind of kicked us off from Joey. I'll link it in the War Room description. The quarterback, he listed, for some reason he listed Brady. I'm not mentioning Brady, but he had Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins is always the first one that comes to mind for me. We were working together at TOJ in the offseason leading to this. We spent a lot of time talking about Kirk Cousins and if he was going to come to the Jets or the Jets leveraging him. He was doing a documentary. We know the Jets offered him a contract. He leveraged that contract into more money from Minnesota. And here we are. It always felt to me that at some point in his life, Kirk Cousins would be a Jet. Maybe that will still happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of time.
There was even rumors this year the Jets could potentially trade for him. It's like always been a thing. But Cousins, if you're not going to like torture yourself with the Braden Mann, Trevor Lawrence stuff or who they could have drafted instead of Darnold or Zach, Cousins is like the recent guy that comes top of mind to me.
He's definitely up there. And the thing with that one was it was so public because it was a unique situation. So you had a quarterback that was hitting free agency that was viewed as a top 12 to 15 quarterback in the league at the time. And that just didn't really happen during that era of the quarterback mattering so much. I think even last year with Derek Carr, the Derek Carr chase didn't even really get that interesting because I think a lot of teams saw the holes in Carr. And with Cousins at the time, I mean, it was very real, right? I think that's why it's such an interesting almost Jet, is that I remember being very close to that entire situation. And I mean, everybody knew the Jets had two plans that year. It was go all in to get Kirk Cousins in free agency. And if you don't get him, they were going to draft a first-round quarterback no matter what. And they were going to try to be aggressive to do so. Now, I think what everybody would love to know is what would have happened if they did get Kirk Cousins. How would the draft have gone? So there's always these trickle effects with all of these, right? But I think at the end of the day, I mean, we saw in the documentary how like his party wisely played the Jets as far as they could to run up that number. You know, he always knew where he was going and it was never going to be New York. And it was weird. I think Jets fans' reaction was interesting to it, right? Like there's part of it where you're like, that's the game, right? Like any of us would do that in that situation. And then there was part of it though that still pissed you off because you're like, God, this is the pinnacle of the Jets not being taken seriously. That no matter what they offered, he was never going there, and they were literally just used to run up the price. But Cousins is definitely notable because of the position he plays and the fact that how much it would have altered history when you look at what the Jets did at quarterback after that.
It's funny. I was sharing through our now dead T-shirt designs for Baker Mayfield and Josh Rosen, because as you said, they didn't get Cousins, and that was the year that they went aggressive and they traded up to number 3. And I don't think they knew who they were going to get at number 3. And I remember going into draft night, we're like, we thought it was most likely going to end up being Baker or Rosen, ends up being Darnold, because we thought Darnold could go 1.
They were not going to draft Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. I know that.
Yeah, we knew it was going to be one of those 3.
Which is ironic now, looking back at it.
And it bubbled because Baker, even though they lost, was pretty good yesterday. Yeah. Been pretty good this season. You're like, you wonder, like, would it have worked better here for Baker or Darnold? Maybe not. What is that 2018 team like with Bowles and Cousins? Anyway, I'm moving to 3 skill position guys next. Alvin Kamara, a famous one. Jahmyr Gibbs, and Tyreek Hill. Kamara, the story was that I believe, and maybe I have this reversed, was it the coaching staff or the front office wanted him in the second round? Or one of the coaching staff or the front office wanted him in round 2. Instead, they ended up just taking Marcus May. I think that was the year. But there was a big leak in the Daily News that, like, the building was split. People wanted to go get Kamara. Sure enough, doesn't happen. Who needs an explosive weapon on offense? Gibbs, there was this huge, like, surprising out of nowhere leak that's who the Jets really wanted, a guy we spent 0 time talking about going up into the draft, because it wouldn't be something you would think of when they had Breece Hall already. And would I rather have Gibbs than Will McDonald right now? Yeah, I think I would. Now, what scares me is that how the hell would Nate Hackett be using Gibbs? And, like, would he even be playing? He would probably be, like, sitting behind Nick Bawden on passing downs at the rate the Jets use players. But that, another one. And then Tyreek Hill, which was like this frantic 4-hour thing where it leaks out of nowhere. The Jets are like the front runners to get Tyreek Hill. And then sure enough, it's to drive up the price. Gets done with Miami very quick. I think we were very candid about this in the moment. We were happy that didn't happen, and are more than happy that Garrett Wilson is the guy.
Yeah.
And another
that podcast is like up there. We reacted before it even. Yeah,
we were pretty direct how we feel. And then 2 other receivers who were in that mix somewhat. A lot of time we spent talking about Deebo Samuel and A.J. Brown as potential trade targets, and would the Jets go do that? And that was like the year, like, are they going to draft someone, or are they going to go get an established veteran? I mean, Kamara is the longest standing one, but of all those guys I just mentioned, what sticks out to you? And what happens if the Jets draft Gibbs this year? Like, what does that look like with this offensive coordinator, and what happened at quarterback?
So I think we start with that one because it's the most recent. And I still to this day don't actually know, like, how authentically real that was, in a sense of, would they have taken Gibbs over, even Broderick Jones and, like, all these players that you just would think they were, like, were they that high on Gibbs? Or was it one of those situations where also these situations come out after the fact where the Lions took Gibbs so much higher than people thought, that sometimes those teams leak things like, no, we know the Jets were going to take him, so we had to take him there, where it's like, did they actually know that, or did they think that? So that one's a little bit more cloudy. And Gibbs is a great player, don't get me wrong. He's a really, really good player. And a lot of people knew he'd be. I mean, it wasn't like they reached on the actual talent. I had him as a top 20 player in that draft, and it was just a matter of taking a running back in the top 15 is what kind of shocked people. And with the Jets, I mean, right. It's what difference would it have made? Because you look at how special Breece is, and Breece, while being a different player than Gibbs, is still that 3-down threat. How much of it? I mean, I guess what it would have done is this, right? It would have stopped them from signing Dalvin Cook, and Gibbs would have easily been more effective than Dalvin Cook. But the long-term nature of him and Breece, that's kind of an I don't know if I trust this staff to. I thought Gibbs was talented enough to almost be a slot receiver when he's not playing running back. That would be the thought process to me if the Breece Hall team drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. But once again, Joe, like you said, I mean, this team couldn't figure out how to use anybody on offense. So why would it be any different there? And good for the Lions and Ben Johnson for really figuring it out in the second half with Jahmyr Gibbs. Kamara one is, the story was that the Jets had a trade in place to go up and get him. And he was a 3rd-round pick. So the Jets that year, you're right, that was the year they took Jamal Adams and Marcus May, right? So
Double up at safety, baby.
they weren't going to take Kamara in the second round. I know that. They loved Marcus May, and they were a little surprised he made it to them. But what they were going to do is, so the Saints that year traded up to the 67th overall pick, and the Jets had a trade worked out to go up for him that would have beaten the Saints to the punch. And I forget what the exact terms were, and I don't think they're public, but at one point I was told the exact terms. And Maccagnan, this was public, this got out, and you're right, it was the Daily News that was the first to publish it. Maccagnan got cold feet on the trade. He got really like draft asset happy and didn't want to give up assets to go up and get the player. So what I think it was, because this was the top of the third round, pick 67. So this is the top of the third round. What I was told was that it was going to cost them next year's 2.
Yep.
The following year's 2. So you would have been giving up a future 2 to pick at the top of round 3. But while that on paper seems, that's dumb, not all drafts are created equal. And Kamara was a great player. So it did make sense to go up and get Kamara in that sense, because he was a player that fell further than he should have. And you had the opportunity to make that move. And he got cold feet. He didn't do it. And the Saints did. And the rest is history. He's on my personal Mount Rushmore of almost Jets. Well, I'll do the Mount Rushmore at the end of the show because I had to think on this a little more. But Kamara for me is because I remember my jaw hit the floor when I was told the story, because that was, so think about it, that's pretty early in Maccagnan's tenure. Not early, but not at the point where it's like, this guy's terrible. Like there was still some faith, and there was plenty of faith, obviously.
Yeah.
And that was a moment that really pissed everybody off inside the organization. They were like, how do we get cold feet at that? Is the thought that the coaching staff and the rest of the front office came away with.
Persistent organizational failure of being terrified of exciting offensive players. It just goes, It's in the lifeblood of one Jets drive. Just right there, but not getting it done. And they just have had such a shortage of guys like that. And you just wonder, they tried to capture a version of that with Le'Veon Bell, but it was too late, and just a missed opportunity.
You know what's even funnier? Nobody talks about this side of it. So the Jets, when they went up for Darnold in 2018, did they go from 6 to 3?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they could have stayed and took Quentin